This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 132 rooms, 157 suspects, one dead body, one wildly eccentric detective, one disastrous state dinner. The Residence is a screwball whodunit series set among the eclectic staff of the world's most famous mansion, the White House, from Shondaland, with an all-star cast, including Uzo Aduba as Rye Detective Cordelia Cup. Watch The Residence, now, only on Netflix.
We
are
Cultivate.
Cultivate.
We are Cultivate.
Hello and welcome to Ye Olde Crime, where we discuss the funny, strange, and obscure crimes of yesteryear. I'm your host, Lindsay Valenti, and joining me today is a very special returning guest, Nicole Von Germeten. Trained as a historian of Spain and its global empire at the University of California, Berkeley, Nicole's research has taken her to dozens of archives and libraries on 3 continents. And today we'll be discussing her work, Violent Delights, Violent Ends, Sex, Race, and Honor in Colonial Cartagena de Indias. So how did women fulfill their needs and desires in the 17th century? This book takes readers into the witches' sabbaths and spellcasting of Cartagena de Indias, a vibrant Caribbean port city. Women of Africa, Spain, Portugal, and indigenous women from Colombia bought and sold love magic potions and remedies as they tried to find lovers and husbands. They risked the dangers of violent men and cruel inquisitors to satisfy their need for love and money. Nicole, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, a lot of people do say Cartagena kind of weirdly in English. So, yeah, that was really great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I totally Google translated it like before the interview to make sure I was saying it as closely as possible.
Yeah, people say Cartagena. It's a thing. Yeah.
What initially drew you to this subject in Cartagena in particular?
Yeah, I got really lucky when I was doing a master's degree at Santa Barbara from I think 97 to 99. I had another student there, more advanced, and he told me about a book by a missionary from the 1600s called original person who wrote the book was Alonso de Sandoval. So that's what got me interested in Cartagena. I had passed through there as a tourist in 96. It's a very fascinating city. And so when I heard, oh, I could work on this published primary source, for my master's degree work, I was so grateful for that recommendation. So that got me more involved in the city through that book. And then you just kind of build on things like once you do one bit of research for a particular region, then you just want to do more. So it just builds and builds. But yeah, being in that city, I'll just say, now it's a lot more touristy. I'd say for the last at least 15 years, it's been much more touristic for international travelers. Like I like to think of it like kind of jet setter types. I mean, maybe that's
Sure.
already out of date, but way back maybe 2010, it was like, ooh, Cartagena, it's so exotic. But so maybe now it's kind of things have moved on to a new place. But in the 90s when I went there, it was still really quiet. And I've heard from older people who were there as visitors in the 80s, and they said it was super colonial feeling still, and it's a walled city, so it has a beautiful wall. It's just anybody who has the opportunity to go there, I just highly recommend it. It's got a certain feeling to it. So once you go there, you kind of want to learn more or go back if you can. So that's the draw. Before I knew anything about the history, I had done a backpacking trip for 4 months and passed through there. So that's what got me. There's the city's so romantic. There's just something about it. It's a Caribbean city. It has a wall. I mean, I think the closest would be like San Juan, Puerto Rico. That would maybe more
Sure.
people have been to. Yeah.
Sure. How did colonial Cartagena define honor, which we've discussed in the past, and why was it so crucial in shaping society?
Yeah, and it's not that particular location. It's the Spanish speaking world or broader Portugal, Mediterranean, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, honor is very different from how we might use it as like a meaning morality, like an honor code. So they thought of it as a lineage but we don't want to think about it like only wealthier, elite, aristocratic people had it. Everybody wanted to have a sense of honor. It's kind of what you could think really loosely like self worth. It's just by different standards than we have today because these things change over time. What's considered a good person actually changes over time. So, the ideal person in Cartagena would be the most honorable person would be a Spanish man who had a job that in some way served the crown. So that could be military or bureaucratic. He was very pious. He showed up to church and did everything publicly, within the Catholic Church, all the aspects of it publicly. Married, as they say in the documents, legitimately married in the church. So that shows, a man of stature, a man who's dedicated to this holy sacraments of the Catholic Church, takes care of all his dependents, whatever they might be. So a patriarch, right? And
Hmm.
having wealth is a sign of honor, but it's not the essence of honor. So that's why, people who aren't well off or aristocratic can also have honor because if they have families, they take care of their families, they're responsible, they're pious. That's also honor. So it's really subtle. And obviously for women it's a little bit different, but certainly being a mother, a family, again, a legitimately married wife are all good things for a woman's honor. But yeah, to me it's the fundamental value. And so whenever I'm doing any research, I can always go back to honor as like a grounding place for this time and the Spanish speaking world.
Sure. In what ways did racial identity influence how honor was perceived or protected in the Spanish speaking world?
Of course, again, not being of European ancestry is going to make it more difficult to claim honor. But people who were again not aristocratic, not wealthy, could be honorable. It was a matter of having this status where, if you were enslaved, that would be more difficult
Hmm.
because, that actually is like what they would view as a dishonorable legal status, right? Because the implication is, your physical labor as well as you're not you're basically not free to kind of protect your own and do your
Hmm.
own, advocate for yourself. But although many people, of course, did and achieved manumission through that, right? So it's super complex. So it doesn't roll people out. Indigenous people actually in the Spanish speaking world could have honorable status because Europeans recognized that there were hierarchies, that there were indigenous noble people. So they
Sure.
actually had honor as well. So that's an interesting aspect. They were recognized. You probably saw in the book a lot, and including the other book we talked about, the use of the terms don and doña. So those are like
Yes.
terms of honor. So an indigenous person could go by don or doña, meaning like sir, lady,
Hmm.
if they were aristocratic from their own culture, right? I've never seen that very much with an African descent person, so that's kind of a different thing. But yeah, so those are some of the aspects of it. But that I've spent like almost my whole career, a solid 20 years with like legal court cases. So a lot of times it's how as a historian, how we can see this stuff manifested in the courts. So it's
Sure.
like how you advocate for yourself. So you have to advocate for yourself differently if you're an honorable man of great stature versus an enslaved individual. You're going to have a different rhetoric. So that's where we can see it because we don't otherwise know how people went about their daily life. We only know what the court cases say because we're historians, we use written sources, you know,
Sure.
and those are our written sources.
To start kind of diving into some of the cases that were discussed in this book, what made the case of Captain Cornelio Cornelius unique? Which I love
Yeah,
his
that
name, by the way.
that we just did that in a class of mine, and the students still seem to like it. Yeah, that's such a fun case. What is it, 1650s or so,
Hmm.
60s? So yeah, 1650s, 1660s, roughly. He's actually an Irish shipwreck victim. So,
Hmm.
yeah, he and his kind of compatriots, and we actually don't know who they are. It's all kind of lies. So when I teach it
Sure.
to my students, I'm like, that was a lie. From the court case. So
Yep.
it's like you don't believe everything you read. There, lots of people are lied in those days too. So when he's in Cartagena as kind of a shipwreck with a complex backstory, he goes out drinking, and they drink dozens of glasses of wine. Him and the other Irish people in town, all the Spaniards are like, "Oh, look at all those drunk Irish people," it's a cultural prejudice, like, they don't know how
Yep.
to drink like us, they're not civilized. I mean, this is something that kind of is not totally unfamiliar, right?
Yep.
Mediterranean versus, like, Northern European drinking styles or even indigenous drinking styles, again, different in this era. So, yeah, he went out and, he got in a fight and actually got murdered. So, it was a court case where it was, this foreigner in town with his wife and some of his kind of comrades from this shipwreck, and, yeah, he ended up being murdered. So, there's this whole deceptive case where they're saying he is a man of great honor in Ireland. There's
Mhm.
no way of knowing if he was or wasn't because his name's so weird, Cornelio Cornelius, like, what could that be?
Yep.
Cornell O'Neill? Those names are actually famous in the era,
Mhm.
O'Neill and whatnot. So yeah, it's a big thing, and they all need translators, so it's really funny to read the translations in these handwritten files that I read. They are very bad at, writing the English names, the Spanish scribes,
Sure.
so there's really funny errors, and it's just very entertaining. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I can imagine, like, especially, like, yeah, just how his name ended up. Like, is that even really what his name actually was based off the translations? Like, who knows?
Yeah, they say Latinized. They say they made it Latin is what I've read, yeah.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
What role did sexual relationships, both consensual and non-consensual, play in reinforcing or kind of challenging the power structures of colonial Cartagena?
Yeah, that's a great question, complicated. I'll try to sum it up pretty concisely. I had from reading those cases, you really learn how marriage patterns were. So, and this is kind of how I teach my students that the marriage patterns were not what we think of. Like marriage is another thing that changes over time, as well as
Mhm.
the idea of love and desire change over time. Nothing is like
Mhm.
universal and static. So I learned a lot about history emotions. Yes, so the a common marriage pattern. Well, first of all, I'll say illegitimacy was much higher in Latin America than it was in Europe at that time. So a
Sure.
lot of people didn't want to invest the tiny little bit of money to have a church marriage. They just couldn't be bothered and it didn't really matter to them. So if I'm
Mhm.
talking about marriage, I'm really talking about people with some property and stature. So if you were getting married, it was about inheritance, right? So people
Sure.
did marry with the women in the marriage were very young and the men were older because they had to set up a very large household. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to get married and live in an apartment, a studio. They had a large household,
Yep.
so the men would be significantly older, a solid 20 years older at best, we could say. So and then the other thing is you got to keep in mind is people's lifespan was so different. So if you're a late teenager, we would hope that's more palatable for us, and you're marrying somebody who's like say 40, well, chances are he's probably going to die by 50. So you only have to kind of put up with him for about 10 years. So then
Mhm.
then you're a widow, which in their legal system, as many others, a widow is a pretty decent place to be. Maybe you've
Mhm.
inherited some money, you have like some legal autonomy. It is a different law code than Northern Europe. So yeah, so that's where I see all these opportunities for love magic because people didn't necessarily associate their marriages with love and desire in the way that we do because they're in a sense
Sure.
they're arranged. It's
Yeah.
convenience. So yeah, that's where you have all these opportunities. So my theory reading these cases is that people kind of looked for sexual satisfaction or even emotional connection outside of marriage, and that was just kind of a given. Now everybody would say, okay, that's fine for men, but I do see a good amount of evidence that women were going that way as well. So it was sort of like they had a different thing where they're not going to assume this romantic experience by finding your true love and then getting married and you're about the same age and you connect.
Mhm.
It's more like just kind of I think the ideal we have where love like, the passion of love is the same as the commitment of marriage, so I don't think that they believe that in the sense that we seem to believe that. So that's,
Sure.
I think, very fascinating because we just assume that the passion of love is gonna sustain through a 50-year marriage, and other peoples around the world don't agree with that. So that's something to
Yep.
consider broadly, you know what I'm saying? And,
Yeah.
it's a ver but yes, there were women who a lot of widows who were looking for, a new man. And then there's the people who are not elite, who are looking there's no way a woman can make a ton of money it's very difficult for a woman to be well off, especially a non-elite woman without a wealthy man on her side. There's just, what are you
Yep.
going to do? You're not going to become a CEO. Like that doesn't exist, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
so this is love magic is a way to kind of hustle that wealthy man. And again, marriage is not an expectation for some people. So yeah, that's kind of part of it. So yeah, it's a struggle. It's a very different sexual dynamic, in my opinion. At least when I wrote the book, maybe if I went back now, it'd be different. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I would agree with that, yeah. Based off the book, yeah, it just seemed like, to your point, marriages weren't for love, and or if they were, it was, like, extremely rare. Like, it was kind of a roll of the dice situation, and if the husband did die and she's a widow, it seemed like when she had the choice, that's when she was trying to use the love magic to find somebody she could actually love and not necessarily or be sexually compatible with, not just I got this old guy that is going to take care of me.
And for the kids, so we can pass on because the Spanish law code, the medieval code is really based on inheritance. It's so complicated. So that is just so obvious that marriage is designed for inheritance. It's just
Mhm.
very obvious. Yeah, and, I love the cases maybe you were gonna ask, but just maybe to give a teaser, like, where, you have a young wife and an older husband, and the wife is like, "I need some love magic potions to, like, put my husband to sleep so I can go out." Like, that is
Yeah.
right there in the cases, like, I'm not, making this up, like, she's literally like, "I want him to pass out so I can go out,"
Yep.
and have some fun, so it's quite explicit in these cases.
Mhm. Speaking of explicit, can you tell us a little about Doña Maria de Montemayor and the kind of the case surrounding her virginity? Do you
Okay,
remember
yeah,
that
so
one?
this is yeah, yeah. Yeah, this is the first one, right? So this
Yep.
my students just did this term as a case study. So yeah, that one's very, very complicated, right? And
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
really requires an understanding of the legal system. So their ideas of sex crimes are different than ours. That's what
Mhm.
people have to get through there. Because again, this is 500 years ago, and it's not
Yep.
Boston. It's South America, right? Yeah, so there's a crime called estupro, and that means basically it's breach of promise slash defloration. So
Mhm.
she argued her parents and she created a court case to say that she was impregnated by this man. She was a very, very this is their case, right? She was a very innocent young girl or teenager, and this man seduced her, and now she's pregnant, and he promised marriage, and he's not going through with the marriage. So basically she's kind of suing for child support.
Yep.
So all that matters is there's only 2 things, is 1, was she an innocent girl who was seduced by a salacious, aggressive man? And
Sure. Yep.
2, did that man promise her marriage? That's
Mhm.
all that's at stake, so people get really confused about this stuff. And so what they need to prove in the case is that, yes, she was a secluded, innocent girl, and yes, what is his name? Don Juan, because that's always the name.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don Juan was a fake marriage promiser, right? So
Yep.
they don't have anyone t they don't have a good he didn't go into the public square and say, "Doña Maria, I would love to marry you." If he did that, then
Yep.
everybody would be on her side. Secondly, her father was never home, he was traveling, so she did not have a reputation in the town of being a secluded maiden. So it's not
Yep.
that we're mad at her or anything, it's just that she put up this case that seemed to have very little evidence that she had been, like, deflowered and that he had
Mhm.
asked her to marry him. It just seemed like they were just lovers. And
Yeah.
that's okay, just be lovers,
Yep.
but don't say, it's not that that's against the law. I mean, yes, there's adultery, but everybody commits adultery, it's it's
Yeah.
not uncommon, right? There's many, many
Yep.
books about this, very good book, well received books. So yeah, so she and the thing is, even though basically no one in the entire town other than her own parents said she was a secluded, well brought up girl. They said her parents said that, but nobody else did. She actually won a ton of money from this Don Juan because it's just politics, like, who even knows? So this is the type of thing that the whole book is about, where it's like they have a rhetoric of innocence and passivity, but the fact that they're bringing up the cases kind of shows that they're not that passive. They're actually very active. They're advocating for themselves. They're like, "Wow, I found myself pregnant by this guy who's like doesn't want to marry me." Who knows how the seduction occurred? That we don't know,
Yep.
right? And we don't even know the age difference precisely because people lie. But in the end,
Yep.
she got a ton of money to take care of her baby or maybe have a dowry for another man. So I think it ended really well for her.
Can you tell us about the case of love magic that involved Doña Lorenzana de
Acereto.
Acerato? Yeah,
Yeah.
Acereto, yes.
That one I haven't done as much in class lately, so I'll try to brush that off. That's a case of a this is early 1600s and the last one was late 1500s. So these are really, really old cases. Let's see. So that was a woman who was an elite local woman and she married this like total jerk. An
Yeah.
older man who was a notary, and so he had, like, his office, his home office, so a lot of his employees were in the house. She married very young because she was an orphan or kind of abandoned by her father, but she was a very elite local woman, so Doña Lorenzana, she was well-known, proper everybody, respected
Proper
her
woman, yep.
locally, right? Yeah, very, very much in the elite, right? And so
Yep.
she had this hateful older husband who had these employees that, just a bunch of jerks in her house all the time. And so, like and she had a couple of kids when she was very young with this husband, so a lot of people have a lot of empathy for her as a historical figure that's gone through lots of different books. So, yeah, I don't know if she kind of fell in love with I think he was a sergeant who passed through town, new Spaniards in
Yep.
town, he's young, he's cute, and she's like, "I hate my husband," rightfully so. And so she got involved in this big circle of love magic practitioners of all description. One was an enslaved man, others were brothel keepers, others were, more like plebeian women, servants, women who kind of were from Europe, roamed around the Caribbean, women of African descent, older women, a bunch of these widows that were into naughty stuff, and desperately trying to get another husband, they were older. I mean, you can imagine at that time, not Doña Lorenzana, I think she was still in her 20s, but some of her friends were like women in their 40s, they're single, there's no way to make money. There's absolutely no way for
Yep.
them to make money, other than sewing or something pretty tedious, right? And
Yep.
low paid. So yeah, so they were just out there, and the phrase that comes up is to love me well. So that's the phrase that they always use. They're looking for a man to love me well, or any man who'll love me well. So yeah, she had parties at her house where they were doing all these spells. They were maybe even calling on the devil, and they had all
Mhm.
kinds of weird spells they were doing with various bodily substances, and yeah, and they all got investigated by first the bishop and then the Holy Office of the Spanish Inquisition when it kind of came to town for the first time. And all these elite women, the ones who were elite, kind of got off easy because
Yep.
they were connected to important men. But yeah, they seemed to
Yep.
have quite a bit of fun. It was quite exciting. And that's where I'm saying, like, she had a well-known flirtation or lover in this younger sergeant who came to town. And this is where, again, I feel like when we're talking about like women's sexual agency and autonomy, I feel like people doubt it because it's very patriarchal society. But
Yep.
if women are choosing to do love magic to seduce men, like I really feel like that's showing that they have some sexual desires and autonomy because
Yes.
you could just leave it alone, you know,
Yeah.
but you're choosing to invoke the devil, you're choosing to do spells. That strikes me as for whatever reason, even if it's purely economic, you want to have a sexual relationship with a man because you're doing
Yep.
erotic magic spells.
Yep.
So that is my argument when people get upset about the book.
Yeah. Like, you wouldn't go out of your way to create spells and potions with your menstrual blood if you weren't like, I really wanna have sex, and I need a man that will have sex with me, so I'm gonna use, yeah, all my fluids and do some magic, and it may work or it may not work, and yeah.
I can't believe we've talked this long and we haven't talked about the one who collected 4 men's semen.
Oh my god, yeah. I
It's
was
been
I
like,
was
what,
like,
25
"Whoa."
minutes?
I know. I think we're getting
Are
to
we
her. I think she's coming up, yeah.
Alright, good.
Yeah, she is. So can you tell us about Cartagena's most notorious sorceress, Paula de Ewauz?
Ayulu, yeah, sorry, I'm probably saying it
Ewauz.
wrong. Yeah, so this is a very famous person, and people might be aware of the telenovela that came out, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago now, called Siempre Bruja. And that's a Colombian soap opera that's like a very, very idiotic version of Paula de Eguiluz. So if you watch it, know that like
Okay.
every single thing is wrong, like literally every single thing is wrong. Like from start to finish, like the first scene is idiotic, like every bit of it is wrong. But anyway, so she's that famous so that there's literally a soap opera where she's a character in it, however distorted. But yeah, she's a very fascinating character that now many people have studied. She's continuing to be quite popular, but she was first really picked up by a couple of Colombian female historians. So I just always want to give them credit because they kind of brought her into the limelight more than anyone else. But yeah, she's a enslaved woman. Actually, she becomes freed during the time that she's investigated by the Holy Office of the Spanish Inquisition, which is like from the 1620s through to the 1630s. So she has three cases, and she's originally investigated in Cuba, where she has a very important bureaucrat mine owner is her lover. And a lot of
Mhm.
people say it's probably sparked by jealousy, right? And then she goes to
Sure.
Cartagena for that because that's where the Inquisition court is in the region. And she goes there and she does her penance, which is like working in a hospital, really disgusting job that nobody wants to do on case unless it's
Yep.
a sentence, like she's convicted and that's her punishment of witchcraft and invoking the devil. So serious witchcraft, not just healing, but real. That's the conviction, right? And
Yep.
yeah, and so out of her hospital where she's working as a, cleaner, servant, that kind of thing, orderly type person, she starts to kind of gather or take part in maybe a pre-existing like love magic market in the town. So people are
Yep.
buying. This is common at the time, and not probably in the present in some places as well. People are buying and selling love magic and potions in a kind of a market, either publicly or maybe out of homes or whatnot through word of mouth. But there is a community of love magic practitioners and sellers. So she's considered like the leader of this, although she denies it. And
Yeah.
yeah, she's a fascinating person. So by the time that I read the cases, she was in her 40s also. She had four children, I think from three different men, but she was still considered like one of the most seductive people. And again, this is a different era. So being in your 40s was, maybe like 60s is the new 40s or something. I don't know
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
by their standards. But yeah, she's a fascinating character. Many people are very fascinated by her. She's probably getting to be one of the more famous people from this era, in Latin America. But yeah, she had all these cases and she answered all these accusations. Yeah, and she was seems to have been incredibly skilled at healing in a variety of ways. And her clientele were all walks of life, including the most powerful elite men, would, pay her for healing different
Yep.
things, right? Yeah, so she's
Yep.
super fascinating. And she kind of had like a jailhouse gang in the Inquisition
Yeah.
prisons that she sort of, you
Yeah.
get the feeling that she kind of ran the jail, and
Mhm.
yeah, she's an amazing, amazing person. And against the odds, she had African parentage, so and she was born enslaved, because her mother was enslaved. And then she, yeah, just survived to old age. There's some record of her because I think she was born in 1595, and there's some record of her, I think, going all the way up to the 1650s, which is an elderly age for that era.
Wasn't she portrayed a bit as a little bit of a like a con woman type of character where she would kinda I don't wanna say get one over on people, but she was very good at manipulating people to do what she wanted in order to kind of further her agenda, was kind of the sense that I was getting. Not necessarily maliciously, but just kind of she knew what she wanted and how she was gonna go about getting it.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, she's a market seller. She wants to
Mhm.
make money. She has to do her choice or what she's the only niche she really has is love magic, right? And
Mhm.
she's a convicted, witch, right?
Yeah.
And she's a black freed woman, 100% African. So she's not in a privileged position in any way, shape, or form. But
Sure,
yet
sure.
in moments of her life, she lives rich. Like she's rich, and that's
Mhm.
because of her hustle. So, you could I think she has this one client who's the one who tells on her a lot, Doña Ana, who's like another one of these kind of young wives who's confused and wants to get away from her husband. So yeah, she tells Doña Ana to do these things to, make her husband kind of go in a trance or make her husband not know what's going on. And of course, Doña Ana doesn't follow the spell very well and it fails. And then she's like, I wasted, 40 pesos on Paula's bad spells. I'm mad. So I'm going to report that to the inquisitors. So
Yep.
there's a lot of like back and forth. And yeah, Paula has such a reputation. She has a reputation for flying. She has all
Mhm.
kinds of things. And it's like Spanish version of the Salem witch trials, but
Mhm.
because it's the Spanish version, and so everybody else going to get confused now who's listening, nobody died
Yeah.
because they weren't into pressing people and being grim. They were,
Yeah.
they had processions. She had to do penitence, but Paula was fine. She lived to old age, and so did all her comadres, all the women. No one was sentenced to death. And she actually flourished. Like they would take her out of the jail cell and ask her to like take care of a bishop or something like that. So she had a really good hustle going. And yeah, I
Mhm.
think she was a very clever and astute businesswoman because she survived all this stuff, 3 trials by the Holy Office of the Spanish Inquisition,
Yep.
like 3 different trials, and she just
Yep.
did it and maintained.
Yeah. I think that's, like, one of the more fascinating aspects of the witch trials, if you wanna call them that, during this period in time is that, yeah, nobody died. Like, they were just they had to pay a fine or they had to do, like, acts of service to kind of like community service almost to kind of make up for their actions, and it's just you don't read about that anywhere else really, like, yeah.
It's because they knew the inquisitors, they had experience, they had studied different cases that had ended differently in Spain, where there were a lot of executions. They knew about that, and they didn't take healing as a serious offense. They didn't take love magic and healing as a serious offense. They just thought it was ignorance. So it wasn't
Sure,
important.
sure.
It wasn't important enough for them to go all cuckoo about it like in Salem. But when
Yep.
it came, and even when it came to the pacts with the devil that they alleged, that's bad, that's not a good thing, but it's still, and of course Paula and others of her social status and the labels that she would be given as a black woman did receive lashings. But I do wonder, if you hear lashings, there's lashings and there's lashings. Like she had the lashings whipping, right, as a
Yep.
punishment, but she seems to have bounced back. So quite quickly, like you never hear of her being ill or whatever. And there's if people are saying, well, maybe we don't know, I need to underscore for you that there's like 900 pages of testimony about her. So she's a very
Yeah.
well-known figure. She's not elusive. Like she's very
Yeah.
well documented, and she's lived a long life and she didn't get infections or anything from these lashings. So I mean, it's logical they were not that harsh of lashings, or she was just
Yeah.
incredibly resilient. She had a great, constitution. Like I don't know, but yeah,
Yeah.
she seemed strong and healthy up until what they would view as old age. So yeah, she did suffer that and the kind of public humiliation. But they said when she went in these autos de fe where they would have the penitential procession and everything, the classic thing that you can see in images, paintings about the Spanish Inquisition. She kind of took charge of it. Everybody's whispering, everybody's excited. She was almost kind of running the show, not the inquisitors. So
Yep.
it's fascinating.
So what makes the case of Doña Manuela de Andrade
Mhm.
stand out to you?
You're a very good reader. I'm sure you're like one of 10 people who's ever read that. But
I was
yeah.
reading it on vacation. I was sitting on the cruise ship just reading the book, yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's a good. I think that's kind of appropriate. Yeah, there's another that I learned about during the research for this book that listeners might find interesting. The institution that was quite well known in the 18th century, so jumping ahead like about 100 years, called the cortejo. And this was like, so I'll try to lay it out. So this Doña Manuela de Andrade had this cortejo, right? So what this is you are a locally prominent woman, like some of the others we've spoken about. And again,
Mhm.
this is 18th century, so it's particular to that era. Again, social, sexual, love
Yep.
things change over time, relationships change. So you're a married woman, you're locally very prestigious, and your family has wealth, right? And
Mhm.
because you want to get a good marriage, you might marry like say a Spanish soldier who's in town, and he's all everything's good with him, but he might not be that wealthy because as a soldier he's just getting a salary. He's not like a rich landowner, right?
Yep. Yep.
So you want to go to the opera and have parties and have silver and really nice clothes and jewelry. So
Mhm.
another bureaucrat comes to town, another Spaniard comes to town, because of course these are all places where bureaucrats go from Spain.
Yep.
And you're like, "Oh, I kinda like him," and he's, like, unmarried, he's unmarried, so his salary is all for his pleasure. So you kinda
Mhm.
get him to be your boyfriend, called cortejo, and you might, like, put on parties together, you might go to the theater together, he might buy you nice clothes, he kinda waits on you. There's actually
Mhm.
even an image by Goya about this, famous, it's a etching by Goya that shows this, where there's, like, a wealthy woman and a man is kinda, like, bowing down to her, and the caption is like, "What who surrenders most?" Because the idea is the cortejo is like surrendering everything to this married woman, and it's not positive that they had a sexual relationship. It's not positive in the cortejo system broadly. They
Mhm.
probably did, but the husband knows about the cortejo because he's always hanging around the house, kind of entertaining the wife. Like it's like a a threesome in a sense. I mean, not
Yeah.
sexually, but yeah, so the husband's like, "All right, whatever, like this guy's always in the house." Maybe in those days, if you're eating like an intimate supper with a woman, like that means you're having sex.
Yeah.
Because that's not something you do intimately with your casual clothes on. It's a much more formal society, right? So yeah, she had a cortejo and her husband was in the military. And so everybody, all had his fellow officers in the military were like, "You are a cuckold in our battalion." Like, it's
Yep.
so obvious. We all know that, and you're making our whole battalion look bad because your wife is over here with this guy, giving presents, having parties, looking cute together, and all that stuff. And so that the whole battalion looks bad because of you. And this is
Yep.
like a very militaristic era in Spanish history in their empire. So it's kind of important that they may have this military status and honor locally, like not just individual men, but the whole group, right? So,
Yep.
so yeah, and the husband gets a little PO'd, like there's some little spats with the cortejo, the boyfriend in the house. But yeah, that's
Mhm.
kind of what it comes down to. And the thing is, this woman is very prestigious locally, like some of the others. So they're just like, she's great. We don't care. These rumors,
Yeah.
like we hang out with her. We don't really care. She's always been kind of sassy. You get the feeling.
Yep. Mhm.
And she dresses kind of trendy.
Yep.
So it's fun. It's like, and also I think it's like a different socializing. So people are socializing different. It's more like French influenced, is what they say at the
Yep.
time. It's changing. Things are changing. My current book is about this whole deal with a particular actress in the 18th century. The book that I'm attempting to write in Mexico City. So I'm really interested in this cortejo thing. It's very widespread in Madrid. Everywhere you have women with all these cortejos.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a fun system.
Can you tell us, this will be like the last specific case that I mentioned, but what can you tell us about the case of Doña Luisa
Oh,
Llerena?
shoot, I messed them up. Whoops. That was the
Oh, were
one
they
that I was. Yeah, yeah. So the last part I was talking about was Doña Luisa. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay, that's
So
okay.
readers, if you're going to buy the book, I was just talking about Doña Luisa. Thank you very much. That's 18th century. You'll have to. And then, yeah, Doña Manuela. I'm sorry, because it has been a while since I've taught these. Doña Manuela was a much sadder case. She was 1650s. She was actually known to be a sex worker. So she was a well
Yes.
known local sex worker who was married, and her husband came to town and he claimed that he was, incapacitated. Maybe he'd had a stroke or something, and so it's a horrible case. So he got his son and some of his son's like thug friends to
Mhm.
say that they were clients of Doña Manuela, and then they actually murdered her. So she is your classic, sadly murdered sex worker. We know that
Yep.
continues
Yep.
obviously well into our time. Yeah, so that is a very sad case. And what I do like about that, and there's quite a bit of detail about her, how her night went, which everything was fine. She was going out with these men to have a drink. This is a normal thing for her. Nothing violent or odd, socializing with these
Mhm.
men. And then, of course, they take her to an isolated place and murder her. So that is, and they claim it's an honor murder, but then they make the argument to the court that it's a crime of passion, but the court says that's impossible because it wasn't the husband. It wasn't caught in flagrante delicto, right? Like
Yep.
it was premeditated. You can't just kill a woman. Like, yes, if you walk into a bedroom and your wife is having sex with another man, yeah, okay, you might freak out. Those are like mitigating circumstances, but in this case, it was planned. So they were quite did propose a very harsh punishment for the husband. The only thing that is uplifting in any way, shape, or form about that particular case is that all of her female friends were like, "Yeah, she just goes out with men. That's her job. We're not stressed. We
Yeah.
you know we don't that doesn't bother us. She's a doña, right? So she is of
Yep.
aristocratic Spanish lineage, and she does work as a sex worker. Not in a brothel or anything formal, but kind of informally. And yeah, she had a bunch of female friends who she lived with, and it was like not that big of a deal. So I like that part about it, but of course, it is sad
Mhm.
that we know about her because of this murder. Yeah, so that's that
Yeah.
case. Sorry if I confuse the
Yeah.
names. I did write the book in like 2012, so forgive
Yeah,
me,
no
listeners.
worries. No worries. So you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what were some of the most surprising or challenging discoveries you made while researching the book?
I mean, the thing that's interesting is that none of these cases are available locally, so you have to go to the National Archives in Bogota to research them. So that's the thing, like they don't survive locally, so you don't have as big of a historical archive in Cartagena, unfortunately. That's one thing that's very challenging. The two cases we talked about a lot, like Paula de Egulus and the one about the 18th century Cortejo, were extremely long. Like Paula's is 800 pages, just that one case of hers, not
Mhm.
all three. And then Doña Luisa's was like 1,500 pages. So it's really
Wow.
hard to yeah, handwritten, and just paging through them. I didn't have time, obviously, to read every page. And even probably more than that, probably more like 2,000 pages. So, and they're scattered in different continents where you can find them. But yeah, so the quantity of information is so intense. The other thing is, I can't grasp every political, like, backstabbing rivalry that's going on in that time
Sure.
because I think a lot of these cases were about that. So I don't know
Mhm.
that I can't capture all that. That's a whole different book, which would be kind of boring, just about like local politics and how everybody
Yeah.
was mad at each other. So I just got
Yeah.
the juicy parts and then try to assume that there's something else going on behind the curtain that I didn't know about. Yeah, so those are some of the
Yeah.
real challenges I had. The handwriting
Yeah.
was pretty good in most of them, so that's a
That's a
that's a positive.
bonus.
Yeah. I was a lot younger than I was 13 years younger, so I was a lot tougher.
In what ways did the historical themes throughout the book inform modern discussions about kind of gender, power, and justice?
Yeah, I have found, maybe I mentioned this to you when I first sent you the book, that I found that students come up to me, kinds of students of all levels, from people finishing their PhD to undergraduates. They really, especially women, but including men, they really love this book for the idea of what I understand is that women, and everybody can relate to this who's in any way feeling marginalized for their sexuality,
Mhm.
that women under these difficult circumstances could express some desire. So I was trying to make it that way, and it has been criticized as like maybe too much in that direction. But I think that a book needs to express what the author's feeling and wants to express at that time.
Sure.
It's always going to be your own book, right? So yeah, I was trying to express that, like, even though it was dangerous and risky, women of this time and place did act on their desire for love and physical contact, affection, what have you, right? And that is
Mhm.
really brave. And so, yeah, a lot of people come up to me at conferences or contact me out of the blue, and they're really inspired by that because history of sexuality in this time and place broadly is pretty understudied in a way. So I think anybody who's like,
Mhm.
oh, I enjoy Spanish, or I'm Spanish speaking, and I want to learn about the history, and then they're reading all this stuff, and it's so grim and depressing, patriarchy,
Yep.
etc. That and maybe that's not how they live their lives. Young people or students of any age, and they're just like, oh wow, there is a place where people actually somebody has written about desire and
Yep.
emotions and the students really seem to love that. So I've gotten the best feedback from this book for sure of anything I've written. And the most like use in classes and this kind of thing. I think it has kind of like a novelistic feeling. So I do think that's what resonates with people because people today, whether they're women or people with other feelings of marginalized sexuality, they still want to read stories of people like trying to overcome those odds, you know?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
That's what's important to me about the book for the readers.
they were able to, even the women that were not considered doñas, like being able to assert some control and over their own autonomy, whether that's sexually or the sales of love potion, love magic, or being able to, you know, hook up with some cool bureaucrats that come through town.
Yeah, yay, bureaucrats, woo,
Yeah, like,
sexy.
have the best of both worlds, like a bureaucratic sugar daddy almost.
Yeah, exactly. I just say bureaucrats because 'cause I'm a historian. It's like, I just wanna be very clear who this man is, you know? He's not
Yeah.
like some guy, like, in a motorcycle gang, like, you know? It's not James Dean, it's like the tobacco monopoly.
Yeah, not some cool thug coming through town on, like, the back
Yeah,
of a stallion, like, "Hey,
yeah,
check me out."
maybe. Maybe.
Maybe he was, I don't know.
Yeah, that's
But,
possible.
so you kinda touched on it. Do you have any new projects that you're working on right now?
Yeah, I had my book that we talked about before, so if people kinda like Latin American history, definitely listen to that one. That's a really accessible book. This particular book is kinda dense, but I do, like I said, people do gravitate towards it. So, yeah, I have that, more recent book about the murder case. It's kind of a true crime book that came out in '23, but, yeah, I'm working on this 18th century woman called Josefa Ordóñez, and she's, like, the most famous actress of that time period of the 18th century in Mexico City. And so I'm doing kind of a history of what it's like to be an actress in 18th century Mexico City. I'm always kind of discovering new things. It's going really slowly because I have my job is very time consuming, even though it should
Mhm.
include scholarship. But yes, every day I discover new things. Like it turns out her mother was this like scandalous actress as well in Lisbon. So
Oh, okay.
Josefa's just kinda continuing the family tradition, and Josefa is married to this guy makes an okay pay as a violinist, but she has, like, literally 6 cortejos. She has, like, 6 lovers who,
Oh, wow.
give her carriages, like, she's like a courtesan, you might think in the
Oh,
19th
okay.
century. Yeah, so
Sure.
she's a famous actress, talented, Spanish woman, seemingly pretty well educated. Yeah, so she's juggling about 6 men, and they're all the richest men in the whole viceroyalty. So they're getting her, like, literally hundreds of pieces of porcelain from China, to Mexico
Wow.
in the 1770s, 60s, and 70s. So imagine the transit, right?
Yeah.
Just stuff like that, and so she's very exciting, and she has, like, 10 court cases from age through her 30s until, like, maybe she's in her 60s. She has so many court cases that she starts, so she's just very, very active in the courts. So she's a very interesting
Okay.
person. Yeah.
Nice.
So there's tons of documentation about her, and then, yeah, I'm trying to make it more general history of theater in that era and in Mexico City. But, yeah, so I'm working on that, so I have about 80% done, so I think that book could maybe come out in '26. Possibly it could come out in '26.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
excited to
that's my
learn more
goal.
about it. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Is there anything else we didn't discuss that you'd like to share with our listeners, whether that's about the book or about kind of you and what you're working on or anything you like?
Yeah, I would say that one thing we didn't discuss, which I think a lot of people would really enjoy, in this book we've been talking about from 2013, Violent Delights, is that there's like 3 chapters on these witch trials, actually 4 chapters, but there's 3 that kind of talk about these witches' Sabbaths, and I just think like that might people might enjoy that because I know for me, maybe I'm older than a lot of listeners, but the whole Salem witch trials like fascinated me, right? And there's so many movies and everything about that and novels, all that. But so if you wanna get, like, a taste of another set of witch trials and with all the descriptions of them having these orgies with the devil and whatnot, um,
Mhm.
that is available. And these are from cases, so, it's a suspension of disbelief, or you can just think that they're lying or something else is going on, but there's a lot of description of, like, orgies with Satan, as
Mhm.
was allegedly told to the inquisitors in detail. So yeah, if that's your cup of tea, I would recommend reading this book. And who
Yeah.
who wouldn't be interested in that? I don't know the person.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. We did not touch on that. Like, I don't know why I didn't include that.
Yeah, that's kind of some people's favorite part because, the devil shows up as a goat. He has a what do you call it? That's a nicer word for farting.
Flatulence?
Yeah, yeah, the devil has flatulence problems. he smells of sulfur.
That's right.
Like
That's
it's
right. That's right.
and when you have sex with the devil, it turns out it's not no bueno.
Yeah. That's right. Okay,
It's
I'm remembering now. I'm remembering now. So this
yeah.
was, and it was very interesting because the cases were one or the other, where it was like some cases were talking about like his semen was like ice cold. And then like other times it wasn't ice cold. And it kind of depended on like what hole it was in. Like and I was like, "What?"
Yeah, and then there so yeah, they have I mean, I go into it a lot of depth, but they have kind of like the demonological literature that all this stuff is based on. And
Mhm.
so they have kind of models or patterns. Like this is what happens when you meet up with the devil. Like, so you may believe in the devil, you may not. It doesn't really matter. This is just how they talked about it, right? And
Yep.
so yeah, the thing is like as we all know, like the typical pact with the devil thing is a woman being seduced by the devil, right?
Yep.
But we do have a man involved. So how does the man present it? Because in this system, like we've been talking about the whole time, it's not honorable for a man to be seduced. So you can't be like,
Yep.
oh, like, and they don't have this like succubus thing like in the original, like the Bram Stoker's Dracula from the 90s. You know, like
Yep. Yep.
they're not getting gender roles and devil worship all confused.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting how this one man called Diego Lopez is like, yeah, I was seduced by the devil, but he let's just say it's not a woman, so there's even some
Yeah.
possible gay sex orgies.
Yeah,
And this
yeah.
is again all from trial statements. I am not making this up. Whenever I used to present this to my students in person, I would show them the exact lines that I read in the trial so they wouldn't think I was insane. Like I would say, this is what I read this from. This is an Inquisition scribe who wrote these words
Yeah.
about having sex, etc. Like you said, the trasero, the other entrance, etc. Like it's
Yep.
all in the files. I am not insane about this, at least. So yeah, I think that people who are interested, it's very sexually explicit, and as are the love magic stuff. So yeah, pick it
Yep.
up. And actually, one last thing I'll say is that it is available in Audible. So if people prefer Audible, you can listen to it, put it on the headphones if there's children in the room, I guess. But
Yeah.
but yeah, so you can get an Audible of it as well. And I said those are always pretty good prices too, so I recommend that.
Yeah, I can't believe I did not include that. I
Yeah,
I am ashamed of myself for not
since
including
last
that.
time we were talking about the body parts hanging off of the wall and everything, I thought we'd just go right to this.
I know. The hand just hanging outside
I
the house.
I feel
Hey.
like you like violence more than
Yeah, apparently I like violence more than sex magic. Who knew?
or,
Discovering
or
things about
orgies.
myself.
Yeah, orgies with the devil just don't interest you.
Apparently not. Apparently,
I
the
don't get
smell of
it.
sulfur and the idea of ice cold semen doesn't appeal to me the same way. But
Yeah, weird.
who knew? It's so weird.
Anyways, I'm glad we end on a high note.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, and I feel like that's kind of the pacing of the book was it was a nice balance between, your kind of absurd cases where like with like the virginity case where it was kind of like was it not, but hey, she benefited from it, so kudos to
Mhm.
her,
Yeah.
to the very sad murder of
Mhm.
the sex worker, like, but it was this really delicate balance of, yeah, these were some things where these women were tried for it, but at the same time, like, the punishments weren't as bad as you would see like in European witch
Mhm.
cases, or the penance that they had to do in comparison wasn't as bad as,
Mhm.
and like you said, to like the lashings didn't seem to be as severe as you would think in the case of like a runaway slave being
Mhm.
punished,
Mhm.
being
Mhm.
with the lashings and stuff. So, yeah, it
Yeah.
was it was a very interesting read from like chapter to chapter, like how the book was broken up, and yeah, it was really good. I highly recommend it.
It's kinda like short stories. Yeah, it's kinda like the short stories in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would like to thank Nicole for coming back
Mhm.
on the podcast and for talking to us today about Violent Delights, Violent Ends. And on that note, I'm Lindsay, and we'll see you next time with another tale as old as crime.
This episode is brought to you by Universal Pictures. From Universal Pictures and Blumhouse come a storm of terror from the director of The Shallows, The Woman in the Yard. Don't let her in. Where does she come from? What does she want? When will she leave? Today's the day. The Woman in the Yard. Only in theaters March 28th.